Welcome to Rico 12. I'm Justin B., your host and a child of an all-powerful and perfectly loving God and an addict living in the miracle of recovery one day at a time. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. This is the final Rico 12 speaker meeting of 2025, and I thank you all for being here and for sharing this message of hope with others in your recovery networks. Rico 12 is an open to all addictions and afflictions organization dedicated to exploring the common threads of the differing manifestations of alcoholism. We share tools and offer hope from those walking a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and locations to learn and support one another. Our speakers come from various fellowships and experiences, demonstrating the universal principles of recovery. Rico 12 is not allied or affiliated with any specific 12-step fellowship. This is Rico 12 speaker meeting number 396. Thank you for joining us live or on the recording later. Today's speaker is Mary Pearl, a first-time Rico 12 speaker, and her talk today will be entitled Postcards from My Higher Power. I look forward to hearing more about her message in a few minutes. But first, just a couple of quick announcements. Rico 12 offers a variety of recovery resources, including podcasts and social media communities. To explore more, visit Rico12.com, that's RECO12.com, like recovery, 12-step, or check the chat and show notes for links. We are still seeking some speakers between now and February, and starting in February, actually, we will be doing a 12-week series on each of the 12 steps of recovery. So if your higher power is saying, hey, your name, I want you to speak on whatever step your higher power is leaning on you to speak on, send me an email at rico12pod@gmail.com. That's RECO12POD@gmail.com, and we'll get things lined up. Rico 12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue this message. Thank you to all our Spearhead donors, past and present. This last week, a special thanks goes to Sean and to Deborah for their generous contributions to Rico 12. The information on how to do that will be in the chat and the show notes of and on the website at rico12.com/support. Your support, both financially and by word of mouth, truly makes a difference in helping us share these messages of hope and recovery. Now, each week, we receive light and inspiration from our speakers. Their experience brings hope, meaning, worth, and growth to us as listeners. Now, let's welcome today's guest speaker, Mary Pearl. Here is just a little bit about her as I introduce her. On January 15th of 2026, Mary Pearl will celebrate 49 years in Al-Anon. She is a student of the AA Big Book and the 12 and 12 as well as the Al-Anon books and pamphlets, etc. She believes in strong sponsorship, and she and her spouse have been married for 56 years, only by the grace of God and our recovery programs. Take it away, Mary Pearl. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Justin. I'm Mary Pearl, and I am a grateful member of the Al-Anon Fellowship. Gosh, when you say all that stuff, it really sounds like a long time. I chose the topic today of postcards from a higher power. When I got to you in my 30s, I did not have a higher power. I did away with any kind of thoughts or anything about. I knew there was a God, but I didn't think God wanted me. From the age of 12, I watched my daddy die, and he was my everything, and I was left with the untreated Al-Anon. There was never any drinking in our home. It was my mother's entire family. Her father, mother, 2 brothers, and 3 sisters died of the disease of alcoholism. My mother ran away from home. So I had to, when I got here, I looked at those steps and I said, I can work all of those except the ones with God in them. And I thought that was sort of humorous today. I met a lady on my second meeting. In my first meeting, there were 2 ladies. And then on my second meeting, I went to another place, and there was about 20 people. And one of them was this lady, and she was very, very friendly and smiling and welcomed me. And I'm thinking, you don't know me. Leave me alone. That lady was to become my sponsor. Uh, One of the things that she taught me was that I needed a power greater than myself. And in my ego, I didn't think there was one. I thought I knew everything and what have you. One of those real difficult ones to help, you know. And I struggled. I would go to the meetings and I would hear them say, let go and let God, let go and let God. And I would think, that's okay for you, but it's not okay for me because God doesn't know who I am. I began to have car trouble about that time. I had a big 12-passenger station wagon, which was going to come in handy going to meetings and taking entire groups with me. I would just turn off. My car, the power would just turn off. And everything was power, so that meant that I had very little control over the car. And then the serviceman told me that I needed my carburetor cleaned out, that it was dirty. He said, it's like the heart of your car. I thought that was sort of a parallel there for me. Not at that time. So he gave me a bottle of gasoline and he showed me how to take the breather off of my car, pour the gas in the carburetor, get in, start the car. It would backfire, knock the trash loose, put the breather back on, and then go on my merry way. Well, that wasn't such a bad deal. I couldn't afford to get car repairs. My husband had gotten fired once he got sober. I thought that was sort of ironic. Um, but that was one of those postcards. We didn't realize at the time how much God had gone ahead of us. You see, God goes ahead and he plans in love. Now, I had very little, if anything, but an adversarial relationship with my mother. And that day at my office, she had interrupted me out of a board meeting to ask me to go and buy her a zipper on the way home. So I got my little zipper, but in the meantime, my car had stopped a couple of times already that day. And I was beginning to feel like I worked at a service station. I began to smell like it too, with the gas and all. And I'm going down the highway, and I'd been to Mother's, which was always a lovely visit if you wanted to kill yourself. And I'm driving along, and my car just stops again. And I only have a little bit of gas left in the bottle. And I got out and I undid it and I poured the gas in and I got in the car. And in my head, I kept hearing, let go, let God, let go, let God. And so I said, okay, God, here it goes. I am Mary Pearl Thompson. I live at 409 Healy Street, North Little Rock, Arkansas, 72117. I didn't want God to confuse me with anybody else, so I gave him my full name and address. And I said, I need help. I just need to get home. I'm only a couple of miles from home, and I just want to get home. I am so tired and frustrated. And I tried to start the car, and it was just rear, but it didn't start. And I said, okay, now, God, it's not going to get there like that. You know, you're going to have to do better than that. It's going to have to do better. And when I tried it the next time, it started. And I went all the way home. And when I got out of my car, I knelt by my car on my lawn. And I thanked to God that I didn't have when I went to work that morning, but that I had when I came home. And the miracle began. I began to see the miracle. You know, miracles have been happening all my life, and that's what I call these postcards from God. It's those little miracles that happen in your life, and you don't realize it at the time, and then later, there it is. I got a telephone call within 15 minutes from a girl I hadn't seen in years, and her father was the top mechanic at the big Chevrolet place, and he had just retired. And so I was telling her, of course, about my car experience. And she said, well, Daddy will take care of that for you. And I said, well, honey, I can't afford to pay anything right now. She said, Daddy wouldn't care. You could pay him whenever. And so within the hour, a wrecker was there picking up my car, taking it, and getting my car fixed. You see, that was a postcard from God. That was one of those little things that happen, and you think, wasn't that lucky? No, it was not luck. It was love. It was God's love for me. Later on, my husband still had no job. And my sponsor was saying, in August, the AA convention, the old granddad, the oldest convention west of the Mississippi, is going to take place. And she said, y'all would really benefit from going to that. And I said, yeah, I guess we would, but I don't know how in the world we would ever afford that. And she said, well, why don't you just pray about it? Well, see, I didn't know how to tell her I don't know how to pray. I didn't know. And she said, okay. She said, all I want you to do is say please in the morning and thank you at night. Get on your knees by your bed and say please. And say, I said, what's this on your knees stuff? And she said, it's just a sign of humility that you know that God's greater than you are. I said, oh, okay. Because she had been telling me things to do that seemed to work when my thinking didn't necessarily work. So I told my husband that night at supper what she'd said, and he said his sponsor had been on to him about we need to go. And I said, well, I don't know how in the world we could ever go. And she told me to pray about it. And I said, you want to pray together? And he looked at me and he said, do I have to say anything out loud? I said, no. And so instead of us on our separate sides of the bed, we knelt on the floor together and we held hands. And I said, God, we'd sure like to go to the convention if there's any way possible. Thank you very much. Not a big formal prayer, not anything. It was the best that I knew how to do. And God knows what your best is. And so the next morning I went to work and I made the reservation in Hot Springs for us to be able to go. And within 30 minutes, JD called me and he had a job. Another postcard. And then we began to try to save money, catch up on the bills that we had gotten behind on. And I told my sponsor, I said, I don't know how we're going to do this. And so I'm a big planner, so I wrote down everything it was going to cost for us to go to this convention that I was aware of. And I said, food over in Hot Springs is more expensive, so we'll eat cheese and crackers in the room. I said, all weekend we're going to eat cheese and crackers and we'll worry about the after effects of that later. And so started trying to save. And JD, all of a sudden I realized he didn't have anything to wear. Nothing to wear. This is the days of double knit. And he smoked and his cigarettes and he looked like a colander. He didn't have anything decent to wear, and I didn't know you could just come as you are to an AA conference. And I was used to work conferences. And so it was real funny because another postcard came in the mailbox that night. And it was an ad from a mail order place in Chicago. They had a closeout on men's suits. You got 2 pairs of pants, reversible vest, and a coat for $49.95. And I said, it can't be much. But when you've got nothing, anything is better than nothing. So I ordered it. Well, we saved our money, and here we are. It's the week before the convention, and we are $35 short. $35. I told him, I said, well, I'll call them tomorrow and cancel because we just don't have enough. But we tried. We gave it. Evidently, God doesn't want us to go. And about that time, there was a knock at the door, and there was the man delivering the suit. And JD says, well, I'm going to try it on. I said, okay, but don't get anything on it because we're going to have to send it back. And he said, all right. And so he's trying it on. He said, wait a minute, there's something wadded up in the pocket. There was a 20, a 10, and a 5. There was the 35. A postcard. That was a special delivery. I mean, we sat down in the floor, we held each other, and
Does he know Kate?
We cried because it was so.
Kate,
Have I gone over my time?
Nope. Go ahead, Mary Pearl. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, we got to go to that convention, and it was wonderful. The people of AA and Al-Anon are the most generous people in the world, and every meal somebody invited us to eat with them, you know. And then it came the night of the banquet, and all the big speakers and everything we heard, and we were wanting to go, but of course our banquet ticket was out of the question. And then all of a sudden, JD said, look in the floor, and there was an envelope, and in that envelope had been slipped under the door. There were 2 banquet tickets, and they assigned tables. Someone gave up their seat with the speakers. All of the speakers were at one table. Was that a postcard from God or what? And we fell in love with the fellowship of AA and Al-Anon that weekend. As an Al-Anon member, I had to learn that I have the family disease of alcoholism. I remember I got my first big book on my birthday that year, and I had been going to the open AA meetings. I liked them a lot better than I did the Al-Anon meetings because they were laughing in AA. Al-Anon was still pretty talking about the problems instead of solutions. And so I really enjoyed the AA meetings. And I was given my own big book, and I read it for him. And I told him all the things he needed to know in that book. But I found out God loved me, and I was in that book. When I read it the second time, I saw my life. I saw everything. I have every defect, every feeling, every except an allergy to alcohol. That's the only difference in our disease. Well, he had an old 1950 model pickup, and he had to get jump started. And when he got that job, he had to work nights for quite a while. And so he said, nobody wants to stand park next to me because I have to have a jump to come home. And I said, well, we'll go look and see about you something. But remember now, we haven't come out of our financial problems. That was going to be years later. And we couldn't find it. And I said, all we want. And I said, wait a minute, we need to place an order. So I said, God, we need just a little plain vanilla truck with a heater. That's all we need, just some little something for him to go back and forth to work on. And we went and looked, and they were coming out with the little small trucks back then. And so we had looked at all of them, and there wasn't one that we could afford. So I came home, and we had prayed about it, and we said, well, we'll just see what God does with this one. Well, that night, someone came to our house and gave us the down payment for a truck. Now, we couldn't find a truck that we liked, just a little plain vanilla truck. The next day we went, God had put one that they had been ordered for a company and it didn't get in time, and so they had bought one elsewhere, and so they were wanting to get rid of that one. And so with that down payment, we only had to pay for a year or so on that car, and that was our God truck. Although I named it Teddy, it was a little Datsun, and I named it Teddy after Teddy Roosevelt because it was a rough riding son of a bitch. Anyway, that was our God truck. Then I got to my third step, and it's, and I said, okay, God, I realize you're working in my life. I'm ready to turn it over for good. What do I do here? And JD was working nights, so I was here by myself. And so I thought, well, okay. So I just said, God, here it comes. I'm turning my will and my life over to you. Are you taking it? And nothing happened. I was so discouraged. I got up, went through the closet, found a Bible I had had as a child. Don't know why I still had that. And I began to open it up and look and see if something meant something. It didn't. So when JD came home, I told him, I said, God doesn't want me. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, I turned my will, my life over, and God didn't take it. He didn't show me anything. Now, I don't know if I want God to appear in my living room or what I wanted, but I wanted a sign. I wanted a sign. So the next morning I got up, and I had put that Bible on top of my ODAT book, which is my one day at a time in Al-Anon reader, daily reader. And I snatched it out from under that Bible. I didn't want it to be contaminated. And so I read my ODAT book because I didn't know what else to do except what I normally did in the mornings. Good morning, God. This is Mary Pearl. There's nothing going to happen to me today that you and I can't get through together. And I'd look in the mirror and say, you're looking at the problem. That was what I'd been told to do. And so that's what I did. And nothing happened. And then that morning when I picked up that Bible, it fell in the floor. And when I reached down to pick it up and put it back in the closet, I happened to look down and it said, be still and know that I am God. That was an airmail special delivery. That wasn't just a postcard. And I was dancing around the house saying, God loves me. God loves me. God loves me. It was such a thrill, such a thrill. I've had postcards all along. But I also learned on one of those little postcard things one day that whatever you think about the most becomes your higher power for that point in time. And so I try to think more about God and what all God does for me and ways that anything I can do to help him. I have a girl I sponsor and she says, God, my day, your way is how she says she starts her morning. God taught me patience. God taught me lots of messages and things through the people I sponsor. What a blessing that has been. Somebody said, well, how many people have you sponsored? I said, I didn't know I was supposed to count. I said, some come for a while, some stay. I have, at least a dozen that have over 40 years. And we have had more fun growing up together and learning about God, and we share about God with each other. And then there was that problem I had with my mother for a lifetime. We couldn't be in the same room 5 minutes. We were not at each other. And my sponsor pointed out to me I might consider that my mother and I were similar. And, I didn't want to hear that. And then she told me, she said, ask God to let you see your mother through his eyes. I said, what? She said, ask God. And I said, really? Well, I didn't know I wanted to have a relationship with mother, but she was about my age then.
5 minutes. Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M and me, Justin B, on Rico 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real-life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M, streaming now on your favorite podcast platform.
And so, anyway, what I did is I prayed and I prayed and I prayed for over a year. And then one day I drove in the driveway in the fall of the year and I looked at my mother and she was out in the backyard and she was raking leaves. And I realized my mother was short. Why wouldn't I know my mother was short? My mother's 5'2", I'm 5'8". You think I would have noticed that at some point? But when I was around her, I went as a little kid. That's what the postcard said. You went as a kid wanting something. You did. What have you ever gone giving something? Oh, hit me hard. And I knew that if I was going to have any kind of relationship, it was going to have to start with me because I was the one that had the program. I was the one that had the steps. And I began to do that. And I gave my mother the first hug that day. And every time I would see her, which was 3 or 4 times a week, I'd give her a hug. And, after a while, she would stand up and want those hugs, but she wouldn't say anything. And then one day I realized how horrible my mother's life was and how damaged she had been. And so I knew I truly owed her an amends. And so I was over there to visit her, and I said, Mama, I said, I was a rotten kid, and I was a rotten adult to go along with it. And I want to know what I can do to make it up to you for all the hurt and all the pain I've caused you for a lifetime. What can I do today? And my mother said, forgive me for not being the kind of mother you needed. And I said, I don't know that you weren't. And my mother came over this time and gave me the hug and a kiss on the cheek. And she said, baby, I love you. I've always loved you. And that hole inside of me closed up. Major postcard. Major postcard. There's just been so many things over my lifetime. And one of the really fun things, if I get it in, when I was a little kid, I went to the rodeo parade we had here. And I had on my little cowgirl skirt and everything. And I saw those majorettes coming down there, and they were swishing and prancing, and I was just overwhelmed. I was 8 years old, but I knew if I had a set of those boots, I could do that. And so I never got the boots. And so I asked my mother one day, I said, how come I never got the boots? She said, you wouldn't have kept them clean. Oh, God, Mama, what a dumb reason not to have something. And so I was telling some of the girls I sponsored that story one night, and then it was Christmas. And one of the girls called and she said, can I come over for a while? I said, sure. And she came over, and a whole bunch of them came with her. And guess what? I have my boots. I have the hat. I have the baton. I can be the drum majorette. there wasn't an 8-year-old in the world that was thrilled like a 50-year-old was to get those boots. Is that about the time now?
That is about the time.
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mary Pearl. I love your story. I love your style. I love your message. There are several questions that I've written down, but before I get to those, I want to remind our live audience, if you have a question for Mary Pearl, please type it in the chat. If you want to remain anonymous, and that just means I won't read your first name, send me a direct message or lead your question with anonymous, please, and I'll keep you anonymous when I ask those questions. But Mary Pearl, I want to start off here towards the end of your talk when that hole closed up with your mom. And right before that, and I don't know how soon before that this message was to you, but you've always wanted something from her rather than giving something to her. Talk to me about that shift in perspective and how that works not only with your mom, but in other areas of your life, and how I might be able to apply that into my life, giving rather than taking from.
Okay. I didn't know that until I drove into the driveway that day. And it was like I asked God, why didn't I know she was short? He says, because when you come as a small child, always wanting something like a small child will do. And he said, when did you ever come over here? And I began to think about that. And I went over there as an obligation, not because I was wanting to give something for free and for fun from the heart. And like I say, we couldn't be in the same room together. We didn't get into it. And so my sponsor gave me some really good advice there too. She said, when you feel like you've got to tell them, shut up and go home. Not another word, because I have quite a mouth when I'm angry. And my mother, I was angry before I went in there, but I didn't have anything to give her. I didn't see her as needing anything. Now, my daddy died when I was 12. She was in her almost 60s, left with a 12-year-old to raise. And my mother was a dressmaker. And so she had a tremendous amount of responsibility, and it never occurred to me because I'm self centered. I'm selfish and self centered. And it's all about me. It's what I want. It's what I want to do. So my thing was, I want to get away from her. And so I want to leave home. So it never occurred to me to ever take anything to her because I was so self centered. And the thing that I could take to her was accepting her as she was, loving her as she was, not how I wanted her to be, because I'm sure I was not the child she wanted. In fact, there's 16 years difference between me and my sister. It was pointed out to me many times how I was a mistake. And so that doesn't make you feel too good either. But how I've used that in my life is I try now wherever I see a need, and I can see them now. It's like God opened my eyes. When I asked God to let me look through his eyes, I could see him like I could see the person that he created. I could see that they were just like me. We're all a fellowship of equals here. Nobody's bigger, better anywhere else. It's not a thing like that. And people say, oh, yeah, but Mary Pearl's going, and I'm going, please don't do that. I am just another member of Al Anon who's been given a gift to be able to tell you a story. And I think that probably comes from my mother's side of the family because there were some Indians somewhere along in there. And if I remember, Indians tell stories. But anyway, I tried to build you a picture of what the things were like and to share with you from the heart to the heart. And I never cared about that or doing anything for others before. It was all about me. So it was all the self-centeredness and self-seeking and stuff in the past. But I have tried to dedicate my life into doing for others what has been given so generously to me.
Thank you for sharing that, Mary Pearl. Beautiful. Now I want to go back a little bit further into your talk, and this is at the point where you had made the decision. Your sponsor, your husband sponsored, both said, "Hey, you should go to this conference, first AA conference that you were going to go to." You made the reservation before you had the money. Talk to me about the importance of faith, taking the step, trusting that higher power is going to take care of you, as opposed to being responsible at the same time. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, my sponsor had told me that I couldn't go on other people's money. In other words, I couldn't take the bill money to go to the conference. And so she said, trust God, and He will make it possible if you're supposed to be there, if it's His will. And I said, okay. And she says, what we do in this program, if there's anything you can do, you do your part, and then God will do the rest. The only thing I could do was make a reservation. And so that's what I did. Made the reservation. It didn't cost anything to make a reservation. This was several months out, and then began to try to save the money in order to go. And like I say, we were still $35 short on a bare minimum. And then God put the miracle in the pocket, because these pants were altered and the money was just wadded up in one of the pairs of pants. I mean, and it was like, God, I would never thought to tell you to do it like that. That's what I said at the time. I would never have thought to tell you to put it in a pants pocket. The exact amount, $35, a 20, a 10, and a 5.
Hey, Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform. Beautiful miracles, postcards. I love it. Mary Pearl, we got a request to get your contact information. I don't want to put it out here on the recording, but can I have your permission if people email me to share your contact information with them that way?
Yeah, that's
okay,
fine.
Very good. I'm going to put the email address that you can send to me, and I can get you connected with Mary Pearl so that if you would like to connect with her, you're able to do that. We have another comment that came in. This is from Joanne. Joanne says, Mary Pearl, you are one of my postcards. I am so grateful for your experience, strength, and hope. I have listened to so many of your recordings and speaker tapes, which have helped me on my recovery journal. Thank you so much for sharing your recovery story. God bless you. Any thoughts or comments on that comment, Mary Pearl, before we go to more questions?
Well, thank you very much, Joanne. I just do what I'm asked to do.
Yeah, thank you for doing with that. Also, I'm grateful that somebody introduced you and I so that we could have this conversation. I've got another question for you. You know, you said that part of the things that your sponsor that you were told to do every morning was, one of those things was to look in the mirror and say, you're looking at the problem. Tell me a little bit about that process and how that is helpful in your recovery and in your daily walk.
Well, I always thought I blamed everybody else for everything. I hadn't done any of the steps yet. And so it was simple. In fact, she got me a sticker to go on my mirror that says you're looking at the problem. And I put one on my bathroom mirror. I put one on my car mirror because the first thing that she taught me to do was she said, you're going to practice the presence of God. So you're going to act as if until it becomes. And I said, well, how do you do that? She said, you're going to take God with you everywhere you go. And I said, really? She said, yeah, because you're your problem. She said, it's not them, it's you. And she said, it's because you want them to be like the way you want them to be instead of accepting them. She said, one of the greatest gifts we give another person is acceptance, accepting them just as they are and giving them the opportunity to grow instead of trying to force them to do something because people will balk every time. And that's right. I would. If you're trying to force me to do something. It's the last thing in the world I want to do. And so I said, how do you practice the presence of God? And she said, well, you take God with you everywhere. And she said, talk to God out loud. I said, okay. I can do that. I feel stupid, but I can do that. And so I would say, okay, God, come on, we're going to go have breakfast and then we're going to go to work. And I'd get out to the car and I would buckle God in on the seatbelt next to me. I'd say, here you go. And off we'd go. And the first thing I saw that improved was my driving. I no longer found it necessary to flip someone off. I no longer found it necessary to yell at them. I no longer felt like I had to lay on the horn. God was sitting right next to me. You can't do that stuff with God. You know, it's so funny now when I look back, but that's how I felt about it. And then we had a lady in our group that had a baby doll that she had laying there in the seat, and she said, that was God. And I thought, well, that's stupid. Isn't it funny? Here I am. I'm just buckling in nothing. At least she had something. So that's the thing, that judgment and criticism. That was one of the most difficult things. I still have to work on it till this very day. In fact, any of your defects can come back at any time. They're just out there waiting, lurking for you, you know. But God is the buffer that stands between me and those where I don't have to do them to the point where they hurt me or others.
I
And
love that image. Yeah, I love that imagery of buckling God in the car next to you. That's beautiful. I have an old sponsee that set up a chair in his work office that was in the corner that he said that's where God sits. And I just love that imagery and that practice of doing that, just practicing until it becomes a part of your life. And this next question I have kind of follows up on this last one that I asked you about, looking at the problem in the mirror. But you said that you got to the point where when you read in the book, you realized, man, I have every one of those character defects, just not the allergy to alcohol. Tell me, how did you feel initially when that realization smacked you in the face? Was that a, yay, I get it? Or was that a, oh man, this is not fun?
well, it was, wow, I'm just like him. I'm just like the others. I wasn't different anymore. And if I have the same problem, why wouldn't the same solution? I have it right here in this book. The solution is right there for AA or Al Anon. And so in January of 1985, I had been having the people I sponsored use the big book all along, and also the AA 12 and 12. Al Anon didn't have one. When I came in, we had 4 books. That's it. But anyway, I said, I can find my answers here. Our solution is in that book. And so in January of 1985, I started a step study from the big book with the Al Anon perspective, not from the AA side. You can't talk about drinking or whatever, but you have to relate. And and when the COVID came, And then we had to close all of our meetings. Our meeting places closed up. The very first night, it was funny, I was having it at my house and I had 40 people, and I said, I can't do this. Not with 40 people here in my house. And so I asked the group, and the group said they would be glad to sponsor it. And it wasn't until much later that we began to get messages that we weren't supposed to be using the big book. And I'm going, that's like you can read the 23rd Psalm, but don't read the rest of the book. I think that's crap. And so I said, nope, my heart tells me that the solution for a lot of us is going to be in those pages on that book. And so I began to study it. And it didn't hurt that my sponsor's husband and another gentleman went all over the world doing a big book study. And I was sitting there listening while they were putting it all together.
That's really cool. And thank you for sharing that, Mary Pearl. You know, one of the things that you shared in your talk that really, well, it gave me the chills. It got me really kind of emotional was when you said, hey, to your husband, hey, can we pray together? And instead of kneeling on opposite sides of the bed, you knelt next to each other and held hands and said a simple prayer. Talk to me about that prayer practice with you and your husband and how that's evolved, how that develops, what you do today, maybe. Hey, Rico 12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word of mouth support, keeps Rico 12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at rico12.com/support or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Rico 12 Spearhead.
Well, it works. It works. I just can't get on my knees anymore. It made us closer. And we found that whenever we were having a disagreement or what have you, that if we would pray together and wait and discuss it at a later time, that we could work out a lot of things, because solutions will come if you're not holding on to your side and won't, when you're in an argument. And as Joe used to tell us, he'd say, it takes two fools to argue. A wise man won't argue with a fool. And I said, oh, okay, thank you very much for sharing. Anyway, I've had lots and lots of help over the years, and JD and I, we wouldn't be together. We've been together 60 years. We've been married 56 of those years. And that would never have happened. JD, unfortunately, today has dementia, and I have difficulty walking. And I told him, I said, well, we've always done this together with God, and we can continue on because you can be my legs and I'll be your memory. And so that's what we do. That's what we do.
Works out perfect.
What a beautiful love story. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I want to go back and talk a little bit more about DJ, or ask you a little bit more about DJ. You said, after he got sober, he got fired. Talk about, just because we're getting well doesn't mean that our life is going to come together perfectly, or at least how we imagine it to be perfect. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
I was very, very disappointed and discouraged. I hadn't got Al-Anon yet. My husband was a master welder, and he worked for the foundry, and they do build bridges and things like that. And he was shaking so bad that he couldn't weld, and so they fired him. They let him drink on the job drunk. They let him do that. They let him work while he was drunk. He said, the boss told me, he said, JD is worth 10 others. And he said, and another thing, when he gets sober, he'll kill himself trying to make it up. And that was the truth. But I got really mad and I thought, well, what is this God deal? How come God loves us so much he took away our income over there and now it's all on me? And I was very resentful at first. And my sponsor pointed out to me that, well, I was so aggravated one day, I was just having a fit, and I was asking everybody to pray for our finances. Pray for our finances. And so I was talking to my sponsor. I said, you know, it's getting bad. We may have to get into our savings. She said, savings? You have savings and you have been screaming and crying about finances? What are you saving for? I said, a rainy day. She said, wake up, it's raining. And so, and then when all of our savings was gone, it was another situation altogether. We had to learn to trust. Just like that down payment for the car. Who comes by your house and gives you $1,000? Who does that? You know, who has that? And saying it's a gift to start with, it's not a loan, it's a gift. I'm going, you got to be kidding me, because I felt obligated. When somebody did something, I felt obligated. And they said, well, work on that. And I talked to my sponsor about it, and she said, all you do is you just be grateful. There may be a day comes when you can help somebody else. And that is the truth. That's what we're here for, to help one another.
Yeah, I love that. It was just pointed out to me, or one of my people that I work with in recovery, he's not a sponsee, but it's somebody that I talk to regularly, yesterday sent me a message about the step 3 prayer and an insight he had into that. One of it is that it's all about not just me turning my will over to God, but me being willing to go out and help others, and give back. Talk to me a little bit about your let go and let God. How does that work for you in your life today? And how do you share the message, as you go about? What are some examples of that?
Well, since I'm pretty much homebound, it's not a big deal. I pray for people all the time. I started several meetings and attend lots of meetings, AA, open AA, as well as Al-Anon meetings. And I sponsor people. I have a bunch of people, like I say, that I've sponsored for years. I think my youngest one is about 3 or 4 now. And I've had others, but sometimes people don't want to do the deal. And the thing about it is, I pray for their desperation. Because when you're desperate, you're willing to try things that you wouldn't normally try. You'll do things you wouldn't normally do when you're desperate. And so, at least that's how it was for me. I had to be desperate. And so JD had to lose that job so I could become desperate. And that's what sent me to Al-Anon, was when he lost his job. I'm going to check with these ladies and see what they do. But I told them I wanted to know 2 things. How do you manage when there's nothing left to manage? And how do you keep an alcoholic sober? And they told me they didn't know. And I wept. And that wasn't like me. That wasn't like me at all. I always used anger, And to me, crying was so pitiful. And I did feel pitiful because I was scared and I didn't have anything to fall back on. Well, see, my life today, I have no biological relatives. JD has one brother who's on dialysis in another state. And so people say, well, how do y'all manage that over there? And I said, we work together as a team like we've always done. There's the three of us. And they said, the three of you? I said, yeah, there's God, then there's us, because God's a part of the team. When we put God in our relationship, instead of going for me, and you had God and you want the best for the both of you, it makes a big difference. And I love this man. I have loved him for years and years. And people say, well, what if y'all have to end up in a, I said, don't even say the words. Our home has been paid for since 1991. We have two cars that are paid for. And I said, we do not have a fantastic retirement, but it's a nice retirement. And I said, there's a boy that came to our Al Anon meetings, and one of the things that impressed me about this young boy, he was in his 20s, which was real unusual at that time for someone, for a boy to come there. And he would go see his grandmother in the nursing home 3 times a week. And I would think, what a sweet child. And so I told him, I said, well, I sponsor your sponsor. That makes me your granny. And I said, are you going to take care of me when I get old? And he said, you betcha. Well, he has. He's a financial planner, and he has been taking care of us ever since we retired. So that's what I mean. And it's real funny because the other day we had home health care comes in because we're so homebound. And right now, my stair lift quit on me the other day. So it means I can't get up and down the stairs. But it it's it's not that big a deal. Let me tell you, if you fall, if you need help getting in and out, fire department, they're good looking and they're strong, and they can get you up in a heartbeat. I know because I had it done just a few minutes ago.
Yes, Mary Pearl. Oh, beautiful, beautiful talk. And when you first came on before we started recording and you told me about that, I was just like, wow, this happened all this morning. And here you are, strong. God is lifting you and doing for you and with you things that you could not do on your own. Thank you for sharing all these different postcards from God with us. And you mentioned another one, that grandson of yours who is taking care of you, you know. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. Do you have any final words of wisdom before we close up this meeting?
Trust God, work the steps, use your sponsorship, um, do what you're told to do.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mary Pearl, for an amazing RICO 12 speaker meeting. If anybody out here in the live audience or the recorded audience would like to continue this conversation or connect with Mary Pearl, please send me an email at rico12pod@gmail.com. I'll get you connected there. If you haven't already done so, please consider going to rate and review the RICO 12 podcast on the podcast platform of your choice, Apple Podcast, Spotify, whatever you use. And also share it with others. If this message that Mary Pearl has shared today is something that your higher power says, hey, put this out there, share it with somebody, go ahead and do it. It can help them in their lives. Come back next week for another great speaker in a Q&A session with, next week we got Dr. Eddie Caparucci, another first-time RICO 12 speaker. His topic will be how inner child work can help those struggling with addiction. I'm looking forward to his talk next week, and I'm grateful to be able to kick off 2026 with this speaker and talk. We continue to schedule speakers out a few months from now. Like I said at the beginning, if I'll be starting a 12-week series on each of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous starting in February, going through the end of April. If you have a favorite step, send me an email. Let's get you set up to speak on that. All right. So before we close out here, let's have Mary Pearl launch us out of here with the Lord's Prayer, and then we'll move on to the next things.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mary Pearl. Everybody, remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back, and when you do, come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching for glimmers of light. Feet still on the ground. I can still be found. Standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and bind it with a seal.